So, after the rigging controversy and the criminal disbandment of X1, yes, I'm still mad, Mnet had a lot of soul searching to do. And when I say soul searching, I mean the executives all had a big serious meeting about how to rig when they couldn't actually rig anymore. The good news for Mnet was that they actually didn't need to rig people that often because they already had good blueprints available. From what we know of the rigging scandal, Mnet actually rigged a very small number of trainees throughout the first 4 seasons of Produce. We only know of about maybe 10 people who survived or were eliminated when they shouldn't have been. There were a few other possible examples. For instance, most people have assumed, although I don't think it's been confirmed, that Wonyoung was rigged to rank 1 and Sakura should have been first instead. But at the end of the day, I don't think anyone really cares if specific ranks were swapped, because those people would all have debuted regardless. The people fans are upset about are those who were rigged in or out. This is all to say that Mnet didn't need to rig the numbers for many people because even when the show first started 10 years ago, they'd already developed a playbook for how to rig. For a decade, across 8 main survival shows and countless other shows, Mnet have rigged the results of these shows through editing and structure. And we know this has worked because if they only needed to rig about 10 people in or out, well, you know they got everyone else exactly where they wanted them through non-number rigging methods. Basically, Mnet have been very good at rigging from the start, so when they had their big meeting post-rigging scandal, the question wasn't whether to stop rigging, but rather how to improve their current methods now that they no longer had control over the numbers. And over the following seasons, they experimented with various tactics, partial interim ranks, judge point selection, and even, in the case of Island 2, literal producer picks and a show predisposed to Riggory. As each show has passed, Mnet have become better and better at getting their way, and have become bigger and bolder in their choices. And now, a decade into Produce, that's all culminated in a group that is like only a single step away from their ideal group. And yes, one far more successful Riggory-wise than even Zero Base 1. Yep, Boys 2 Planet is over, and I bet Mnet are patting themselves on the back because not only did they get 6 out of 8 of their ideal members, but the 2 remaining members they are neutral towards, and successfully rigged in favour of trainees they didn't like. They don't have the same hatred for any of the LD1 members that they have for some other debuted trainees. And to top it all off, not only were ranks 1 to 6 almost in exactly the right order, but the 2 trainees they didn't want were right at the bottom, unlike a certain someone whose name begins with an R. In this video, I'll talk briefly about the history of Boys 2 Planet, and then we'll talk about the Riggory of the show and the consequences for the trainees and the final group. If you want to watch more on this topic or want more in-depth videos, you can watch my Zero Base 1 vs Boys 2 Planet video, or my videos regarding my Boys 2 Planet posts. There isn't really a trigger warning for this video, but I will be talking about Sinophobia, Xenophobia, and Mnet shows in general. Also, a fair warning in advance, since I'm focusing on how Mnet rigged their ideal lineup, there won't be much of Junso or Sanghyun here, sorry. So with that said, let's get into the history of the show. Boys 2 Planet, which really ought to have been called Boys Planet X or Boys X Planet, was an Mnet K-pop survival show which ran from July to September 2025, initially featuring 153 male trainees across both a Chinese and Korean show, and later 80 trainees in a combined show. Although the original shows were Chinese and Korean, there were trainees from various countries, including Japan, Thailand, America, and Australia. The combined show produced a final 8-member group, Alpha Drive 1 or ALDI-1, made up of Sungwon, Anshin, Shinlong, Gongwoo, Jiahao, Leo, Sanghyun, and Junso. This was a lineup of 5 K-show trainees and 3 C-show trainees, but is technically a 4 Korean, 4 global group. The show was the second season to follow up 2023's Boys Planet, and was more generally a follow-up show for Girls Planet 999 in 2021 and Island 2 in 2024, and expanded upon all 3 seasons, integrating elements from all of them and from Produce, the original show series. In fact, after Zero Base 1 and Isna, Mnet became far more confident in their Riggory, to the point that they brought back far more elements from the original Produce series, and especially from Produce X101, through the X or 0 star ranking in the demo stages. Hence, Boys X Planet. Although Aldi 1 haven't debuted yet and we're still in the complaining phase, the show itself was very successful and attracted a lot of attention and engagement. A few days after the finale, Dispatch revealed parts of the debut group and trainees' contracts, which were criticised for being predatory, as they kept hold of trainees even after they were eliminated. The contracts also revealed that the final group, Aldi 1, would last for 5 years, with a 6th year of promotions. Both of these things were, in my opinion, very predictable, especially considering the success of the previous seasons, and especially Zero Base 1 and Even, who might have been made through a similar contract. Anyway, as I mentioned in the intro, most importantly for Mnet, the final lineup was pretty close to their ideal one, and didn't include any trainees they actually straight up don't like. Also, it had Centre Sangwon. Mnet successfully diverted Centre Anshin or Shinlong. Woohoo! So, how did they manage that? As usual, I'll go over the quick things that apply to all of the Planet shows. For more in-depth discussion of these things, see Minisode 14. Those things include a Korean international divide and discrimination, although thankfully it seems like Mnet actually brought out translators this time, considering Shinlong thanked them. Mnet's structural riggory also includes the evil editing of Chinese trainees, the 50-50 vote ratio, the use of partial interim ranks, screen time and salience, and the manipulation of the demo stages through styling, song choice, etc. 2 prime examples from Boys 2 Planet are Gongwoo and Shinlong. Gongwoo was given Sweat to sing, directly tying him to being an appropriate replacement for Zero Base 1. Shinlong was given an outfit that far outshone his teammates, including contacts and unique hair, was placed front and centre, and was given a Stray Kids song, directly tying him into their concept and to them as a popular group, thus making their fans more likely to vote for him. I also want to note that all of Mnet's ideal members were highlighted in the first episode, with the exception of Junmin, whose performance was shown in episode 2. Shinlong's performance was also shown in episode 2, but he was very salient and got tons of screen time in episode 1, to the point that I could predict he was one of their picks even when he hadn't performed yet. Mnet also used the first performance and allowing trainees to show extra skills to rig people. In this season, we got this with Dongyu, who was shown in the first performance, was given one of the best edits a trainee can have in episode 1, and was allowed to showcase his dance, rap, vocals, and leadership, setting him up nicely for literally becoming Gunnock 2.0. I also talked about the interim checks after a short period to practice, elimination rounds being traumatic, the stressful nature of reality shows causing people to act out, the mentors being the mouthpieces of Mnet, the use of certain, and probably led, trainee confessionals, performance editing, out-of-context clips, the placement of all of the desired trainees in the top half of the rankings, but not right at the top, and the use of signal song centres. Yep, that's a lot. Okay, now let's talk about things specific to Boys 2 Planet, or other specific instances. First, the use of separate channels and methods for C and K group promotion. Because there were 2 shows, Mnet created new social media channels for the C show. But because this was a new channel and the K show channel was just the original Boys Planet channel, the C channels had less subscribers or followers and less views. On top of this, the C show PR videos had no subtitles, and still have no subtitles months later, while the K show ones were given subtitles right away. On top of that, C videos, especially for the Signal song, were released a day later, the reasoning for which quickly became clear when it was revealed that Mnet used the view counts for these videos to help dictate who survived or didn't survive the merge, and that they measured all of the trainees on the same scale. Of course, there was no adjustment for the C trainees who overall had lower views because of a different channel, less promotion, and later release dates, because Mnet are sinophobic and wanted as few of them as possible to survive. Second, the use of the 0-star rating in the demo stages, the signal song test, and before the merge. Mnet's criteria for star ratings included, quote, skills, charm, and potential. This language is very wishy-washy and is basically designed so that Mnet can feasibly eliminate anyone they want by claiming they're lacking in one of those things. Charms and potential are almost impossible for us to measure, so who are we to say that the mentors are wrong? Similarly, this could be used to keep trainees that are less skilled, as the mentors, the mouthpiece for Mnet, can claim that someone who's lacking in skills should still stay, because they have charms or potential. This is the kind of borderline BS justification that was used to rig Mai into Isna and to rig Fuko and Yuju out. The ability to give trainees 0 stars and later for Mnet to not reveal their random formula for views x master points before the merge allowed Mnet to get rid of the majority of trainees they straight up didn't want before the merge happened and things were more out of their hands. Sure, there were some people who were eliminated who they probably wanted to keep, like Jack, and there were some people who stayed who they probably wanted to get rid of, like Hanim, Shou, Shongxing, etc. But overall, Mnet got their way with this. And as much as people complained about Riggory, especially in terms of the competition being rigged against C trainees and the elimination of Hyop, I think that this was overall a good decision. The first round performances this season were overall, in my opinion, far higher quality than in previous seasons. Sure, there were a few questionable moments, like Shongxing and Shou in Kill the Romeo and some Rising Sun moments not being as good as they could have been, but overall they were all pretty damn good. And a lot of that comes down to most of the super unskilled trainees being eliminated early. Okay, next, the star hierarchies. This was ripped straight out of Island and was wacko, but most of all, it's designed to make the lower star trainees feel more stressed, less relaxed, and generally not so hot. Trainees have talked about this in interviews. This means they're more likely to break, and the higher star trainees are more likely to do well. This isn't likely to have a big effect, but it is still worth mentioning. Of course, Mnet will do their best to make sure that all of their picks are all-stars for as long as possible, and will give them more screen time which can be supposedly justified by their high star level. When we get to the first mission, the trainees are forced to sort themselves by star level, which is very convenient for Mnet considering they themselves chose the rankings. This means that they can do things like make Yumeki rank 1, knowing that he, with his experience, will create a good group, likely with other top-ranking trainees, i.e. Mnet picks, and thus will likely win and gain free promotion for said trainees. Okay, so I'm just looking at this now. This is like mega predictable, but if you look at the Masters ranks in episode 3, it's filled with Mnet's top trainees, but not fully filled because, you know, what if the fans catch on to who their ideal lineup is, right? So they've got Yumeki at rank 1, like I said, he'll pick a good group, then Sangwon and Anshin, right, 2 Mnet picks, then Kangmin, who, like, realistically they can't put out of the top 8 with his skills, then Gonwoo, Leo, 2 more of their picks, Hyunchan, I don't know what he's doing there, but, like, we can't have all Mnet picks in the top 8, right, and then Jiehao, who's one of their picks as well. So top 8 and 5 of them are Mnet picks, and that just shows, like, that's an example of the kind of riggory they'll use. They're obviously going to put their top picks in the top 8 because that signals to Yumeki, hey, pick these dudes, and they're all Mnet picks. So then Yumeki's going to make a good group with a bunch of Mnet picks so Mnet can like really promote that group and all of that. I'll get into it. I want you to note that all of Mnet's picks are made all-stars in this segment, and through the Yumeki plot, as planned, most of them are concentrated into Whiplash, Gonwoo, Anshin, Sangwon, and Leo. Jiehao, Junmin, and Dongyu are in S-Class, and Shinlong is in Plot Twist. The idea here is that as all-stars, all of Mnet's picks are practically guaranteed to win their battles, and at least some of them will win the M Countdown and the Studio Tune benefits. Predictably, the group that has the largest number of their picks wins, and of course, Jiahao, Junmin, and Dongyu won and got the benefit. The only pick of theirs who lost was Shinlong, but Mnet jumped on that angel editing bandwagon the moment they saw him want to do S-Class, so that was all good as far as they saw it. In the second and third missions, as I've said before, it's entirely possible for Mnet to manipulate things here and there. They could switch up the numbers a bit for the individual scores. I don't think they did since nothing crazy happened, but they could, and conveniently the second mission's 2/3-star rankings post-performance are borderline meaningless for the actual elimination. So Mnet gets a fun storyline out of it without letting only 200 people decide who lives and dies. Hilariously enough, in the second mission, Mnet used staging and theming, and made use of their epic Shinlong Riggory in round 1 to pretty much ensure that, if like Jenny team didn't win, La 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 team would, with 2 of their favourite trainees on the show no less. The other major piece of riggory here is that they showed Dongyu's epic edit in Bad the day before voting ended, and the day before Dongyu was shown in The Last Survivor Live. This means that compared to Zei and Harry, who'd had no screen time, he was salient in the audience's minds, and was practically guaranteed to survive. There's nothing exciting in the third mission outside of the fact that Mnet could well have shuffled people between groups, as in, the groups were evenly filled, right? But the likelihood that fans evenly filled the trainees was low, so at least some people got pushed around a bit. For instance, Zihao could well have been voted into Lucky Macho, but might have been stuck in Main Dish because, well, Mnet like him more than anyone else in Main Dish. Before the third eliminations, Mnet used 2 sets of interim ranks to rig. They showed Kaiwen, Yumeki, Zihao, Junmin, and Sanghyun, all of whom they like or are neutral towards, on the border of elimination, and used this to shove Masato and Hanem, who they don't like, out. More successful riggory. When we get to the finale, Mnet get to present the audience with 2 sets of potential centers, Jiahao versus Yumeki and Anshin versus Kangmin, a set of choices so hilariously obvious and one-sided that I'm shocked that anyone was even invested in that battle. There was literally 0 chance of Kangmin or Yumeki winning the popular vote. The other riggory here is, of course, the interim check, which showed literally only that Sungwon was in PO2, and literally nothing else, making it a very predictable interim in that everyone and their mum expected Sungwon to drop, but also a very unexpected interim in that literally no one expected only one rank to be revealed. Mnet were probably having a heart attack at this point because either Anshin or Shinlong, 2 Chinese trainees, were in rank 1. I personally think it was Shinlong, and I'll tell you why. No, I'm not just biased. Anshin and Shinlong were very close in point count, so it could feasibly have been either of them. But when Sungwon's rank was announced, many people would have assumed that Anshin was in rank 1, and would have panic voted for him, trying to keep him there a la Junghao. But Shinlong fans didn't believe he was that high, so wouldn't have been impacted by the panic as much. This would explain how Anshin would be able to overtake Shinlong, and of course, Sungwon got lots of votes because everyone wanted him to be first. This interim led audiences, understandably, to think that Mnet had their exact ideal lineup for the top 8, which is a fair assumption and is one that I made too, and although I did, I still thought it was possible but unlikely. The results of the actual finale showed that, actually, Mnet didn't have their ideal lineup, and the reason they hadn't revealed an interim past Sungwon was purely because of who were in ranks 9 and 10, Kangmin and Liu. Mnet had their ideal top 6, and then they had a whole group of people they didn't want before we get to Junmin and Dongyu at ranks 14 and 15. Although it would be possible for Junmin and Dongyu to rise and debut, see Tele, it was incredibly unlikely considering how far their points were from the top 8, and their relatively low Korean votes, unlike Tele. There was also a slight possibility that any interim Riggory would lead to others pushing ideal people out of the top 8. And, Mnet didn't want either Sanghyun or Junso, but they were preferable to Kangmin, Liu, and Yumeki. So they needed to keep those two at all costs, even if that cost was Junmin and Dongyu. Alright, let's talk about the actual Riggory of the trainees they wanted briefly. Sangwon was highlighted from episode 1 and was probably the trainee with the most screen time on the show. From the start, Mnet established him as having an on-stage-off-stage duality and highlighted his shy, introverted nature and his depression and lack of confidence about his skills. This let them give him underdog arc after underdog arc, basically blaming his anxiety for everything when he had no reason to be nervous about his rank. Every single mission he was in, Sangwon was praised and got tons of screen time. Unshin was, the C center, instant Riggory. He was always popular and was the center, and because of this, similarly to Hikaru on Girls' Planet, Mnet knew that they didn't need to give him a story time or much screen time to debut. In fact, they smartly, if you consider the results of the finale, gave him very little screen time, likely knowing that if they gave him even a hint of a good storyline, he'd rank first. Don't forget that half of the reason Jung Hao ranked first was because of how epic his story on the show was. Mnet learned their lesson. Anyway, all of the screen time Unshin did get was still positive. He was highlighted as skilled and good-looking from episode 1 and was highlighted as being a good K-pop performer. He was also shown to be nervous, which would make fans feel protective of him, and he had several cute and funny maknae moments throughout the show. Mnet did give a few hilarious hints of Unshin having a vocal struggle storyline, and I say hilarious not because they were funny, but because Mnet clearly knew that by giving those tiny little hints of negative story, Unshin fans would go wild and vote harder. But Mnet never actually needed to follow up on them for them to have their desired effect. Hilarious. Shinlong was, one of the most rigged people to ever be rigged in produce history. From the moment the trainees' pictures were released, it was obvious. He got the cool hair and the highlight, and then got a bigger and bigger highlight as time went on. He had tons of screen time in both episodes 1 and 2, and was shown to be popular, skilled, likable, and so on. He was even explicitly labelled a hexagonal idol by Mnet. Basically, he was already perfect, and Mnet drawing explicit attention to this is very obvious Riggory. Then we have his whole saga in episodes 3 to 8, where he was basically portrayed as the most angelic person to ever exist. He was humble and didn't seek power, he was loyal to Zihao, he was the bridge between C and K trainees, he was hardworking, he was funny, and so on. Mnet did have to tone down his screen time in the last third of the show because they started realising that, he could rank first, but they still showed him in a positive light. Shinlong got a literal survival show winning edit. Insane. In fact, he was basically the main character of the show, probably even more so than Sangwon, and this was shown by how much people swooned over his finale speech and hug with Zihao, in comparison to literally no one talking about Sangwon and Anshin's speeches. Gongwoo was obviously the K center, so practically guaranteed to debut and endorsed by Mnet from the start. He got tons of screen time and was shown to be hard-working, desperate to debut, skilled, a good leader, and versatile as both a rapper and dancer. Mnet played his arc very smart. After his scandal, they erased him for a few episodes, then started subtly adding him back in, and then started associating him with Sangwon and especially Shinlong, both of whom had been shown to be actual angels. This, combined with what I think are some genuinely great performance moments from him, well and truly secured his debut. I said at the start of the show that if he got screen time, he would debut, and what do you know, I was right. Jiahao was, contrary to popular belief, pushed from the start. He was introduced with Anshin, and although Anshin was definitely highlighted more out of the two of them, Jiahao still got lots of screen time. He was highlighted as skilled, especially in relation to K-pop specific dance, which was a great endorsement from the masters. Their performance was good, which reflected well on him, and he was given the same nervous edit, encouraging protectiveness that Anshin was given. He also acted as the leader out of the two of them, which reflected well on him. Jiahao was then made a candidate for the killing part of the signal song, another explicit endorsement of his skills by Mnet, and was praised in the first mission for his skills. Mnet even included a clip of the other trainees chanting his name in the self-check for S-Class, showing Mnet's implicit support for him. Then, of course, Mnet set him up nicely for viral moments in both Tambourine and Chains. They literally gave him 3 crop tops in a row. Mnet highlighted his performances and his good attitude and hard-working nature, and tied him in Chains to Sungwon, the most popular trainee on the show. They also repeatedly highlighted his selflessness, and they gave him a sob story of how many times he missed out on the killing part. Basically, yeah, he was rigged, and this is another survival show winning edit. I've said before that one of the ways Mnet rigs people is in setting them up for and orchestrating viral moments, something they failed to do for Dongyu but successfully did for Sangwon, Shinlong and Jiahao. Next, Leo. Leo was explicitly supported by Mnet from the start of the show. He was tied to Sungwon, the most popular trainee, and the judges literally said, "That's our main vocalist," about him in episode 2, an explicit endorsement. He was then given good performance moments throughout the show, was praised, and was generally shown in a positive light. He was especially highlighted as a caring and helpful Hyung, a chaotic personality, and as a producer showing multiple talents. Similarly to Anshin though, Mnet were confident in his ability to debut, and thus didn't need to give him much extra screen time. It's worth noting here that Mnet were confident in Sangwon's ability to debut, but not in his ability to rank first. Next, Junmin. He was highlighted from his performance in the second episode, and then in every single mission was highlighted for his performance skills. He was given an improvement and confidence growth arc, and was explicitly endorsed by Mnet via Kani. He was also highlighted as having a very good personality and generally being a good person. I don't have much to say about him. He was given tons of screen time, was associated with popular trainees like Shinlong, and was highlighted for both personality and performance. The only issue was that, like with Park Hanbin in Season 1, Mnet never managed to inspire the passion for him in audiences that he needed to debut. Dongyu was highlighted from the first performance as an all-rounder and was another hexagonal idol for Mnet. He was praised in the first mission and was highlighted massively in the second and third mission for his skills and personality. He was painted as a stellar leader and a selfless individual, and was tied to popular trainees like Shinlong and other Mnet picks like Junmin. He was especially highlighted as a competent main vocalist, but as I've said previously, the one place in which Mnet went wrong with him was not giving him an epic viral high note moment. They probably should have put him in main dish to do that, or something like that. Dongyu also got tons of reaction shots throughout the show, which was a subtle endorsement of him. Many of these trainees were portrayed, explicitly or implicitly, as hexagonal idols, which seems to have been the theme of Mnet's selection this season. All of these trainees were also tied to the alpha concept, or to other darker, sexier concepts. Whiplash, S-Class, Tambourine, La 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 La, which was literally a wolf concept, Queen Card but in leather, Chains, Bad, etc. Mnet even dressed the Never Been to Heaven team in like cowboy outfits when they ought to have been in pastels or something, because their faves are in that group and their faves suit darker concepts. So let's just make it a little darker. Anyway, with that said, let's talk about the consequences of this Riggory. Alright, let's start with the top 16. This top 16 was surprisingly unsuccessful. I think that Mnet got 11 out of 16 of their ideal top 16, but I think they got 13 out of 16 they were happy with. It's pretty typical for 3 people Mnet doesn't really want to get to the finale, so I guess this is acceptable levels of weirdness. I think the 5 people they didn't want were Sanghyun, Yumeki, Junso, Kangmin, and Liu, who I think they would have replaced with Zihao, Hengyu, Qingwei, Yunso, and Hanwen. Note how most of these people are Chinese, and all of them are people who don't threaten Mnet's final lineup, but who Mnet like, or at least are neutral towards. As far as the 3 Mnet were unsatisfied with, I think they were Junso, Kangmin, and Sanghyun. The reason for that is because these are the 3 people who have an actual chance of threatening Mnet's ideal lineup. Yumeki and Liu, for instance, don't actually pose a threat to their ideal lineup. I think they'd replace Junso, Kangmin, and Sanghyun with Zihao, Yunso, and Hengyu if they could. As far as the top 8, well, it's pretty obvious. They got 6 out of 8 of their ideal lineup, with only Sanghyun and Junso sneaking their way in place of Junmin and Dongyu. That said, as I've said previously, Mnet preferred Junso and Sanghyun to their other duo option of Kangmin and Liu, so even then they were okay with them. And this is the beauty of the Aldi 1 lineup from Mnet's perspective. They got Sangwon at rank 1, they got 6 out of 8 of their ideal lineup, and the 2 final members were ranked at the bottom and were people they're more neutral towards as opposed to hating. So let's talk about actual various lineups. There has been this picture going around, which I believe was based on the finale points combined with G/K vote ratios from either the second or third eliminations. Thus, this hasn't in any way been confirmed, and honestly, it's probably relatively inaccurate. But it's the best guess we have, and unlike most other guesses, is at least evidenced by some, actual maths, so let's take a look. First, the lineup based on overall votes, which, like last time, I needed to calculate. Why don't people just calculate this in their infographics? Here are the votes I calculated in original rank order. My apologies if anything is wrong. Anyway, by this data, our unweighted group would be Sangwon, Unshin, and Shinlong. All 3 of these guys got over 3 million votes. Junso, Jiahao, Leo, Gomwoo, and Yumeki for a 5K3C or 3K5G lineup, with Kangmin in 9th again and Sanghyun in 10th. Note how, as usual, the 50-50 ratio benefits Mnet, as here it pushes Yumeki out in favour of another Korean trainee, Sanghyun, and it pushes Gomwoo up and Junso down, which is another bonus for Mnet. As a matter of interest, the fact that the actual lineup and the one based on unweighted votes are so similar, and that the weighting had such little effect, reflects how well rigged this final group is. Mnet had very little they needed to change. This is also the case with Zero Base 1, but I feel like it's even stronger with Aldi 1. If the lineup was decided by Korean votes only, this table would suggest it would be Sangwon, Gomwoo, Sanghyun, Unshin, Shinlong, Liu, Kangmin, and Leejong for a 6K2C or 5K3G lineup. Here, Jiahao is in 9th, Leo in 10th, and Aldi 1 member Junso is in 14th. Unsurprisingly, and as usual, the Korean trainees rise and the international ones fall, although Liu is more popular with Korean audiences, probably because of families, and both Unshin and Shinlong have strong Korean 1 picks. And apparently Junso doesn't for some reason. Is that like a BL thing or something? By international votes, the lineup would be Sangwon, Unshin, Shinlong, Junso, Jiahao, Leo, Yumeki, and Gomwoo, with Kangmin in 9th again. I guess he's doomed. Liu in 10th, and Aldi 1 member Sanghyun in 11th. This lineup is 5K3C or 3K5G. Now, for Mnet's ideal lineup. I've talked a lot about this throughout the show, so the actual members shouldn't be a surprise, but this is the first time I'll order them in the rank order I think Mnet wanted them in. Sangwon, then either Unshin or Shinlong. Gomwoo, Junmin, Leo, Unshin or Shinlong, whichever one wasn't above. Jiahao, and Dongyu. This is a 5K3C or 4K4G lineup. Let me explain. Obviously, Mnet wants Sangwon to be the centre, and they probably wanted this even before Gomwoo's scandal. Then they have a C trainee to be epically defeated by the Korean Sangwon, symbolically killing Junghao basically, and defeating any hopes of another C centre. The only thing is, I don't know if Mnet would rather have Shinlong be that sacrificial C trainee or Unshin. On one hand, Unshin is best for it as the C centre, but on the other hand, Mnet really like Shinlong. Anyway, one of them goes there, then we have Gomwoo, duh, and Junmin, another Korean trainee. Then we have Leo, an ethnically Korean global trainee, the remnant of the Unshin-Shinlong pair, Jiahao, another Chinese trainee who needs to be at the bottom, and last, probably Dongyu. They could put Dongyu higher, but let's be real, either he or Leo would need to be at the bottom for drama reasons, making fans freak out that they might not make it. Another good option to freak people out would be to have Shinlong in 8th, but I think Mnet likes Shinlong too much for that, and he'd probably actually die on stage from stress if that happened, so it's probably a good thing he was higher. This group is very balanced, with centers, dancers, rappers, vocalists, variety personalities, and leaders, all of whom fit the alpha concept that was pushed for the group from the start. As I also mentioned in my original show analysis, it also conveniently and coincidentally balances the C trainees, Jiahao for dance, Shinlong for rap, and Unshin for vocals. I mean, Shinlong and Jiahao are all-rounders, and Unshin can dance, but like, you hopefully can see what I'm saying. Okay, so what about the consequences of this? Well, first of all, I want to take a moment to draw your attention to this stat I showed earlier. Mnet may have only had 6 out of 8 of their ideal lineup, but they had 8 out of 8 people they were happy with. 8 out of 8. Even Kepler weren't that good. So let's just say that despite the tragic loss of Dongyu and Junmin, Mnet were patting themselves on the back with this group. Although the group were massively rigged, similarly to with Zero Base 1, Mnet was subtle enough that most viewers don't seem to have noticed. For instance, they haven't noticed the Riggory of Unshin, Leo, and Jiahao, and think they were voted in organically. Or they recognise that someone was rigged, such as with Gomwoo, Sangwon, and Shinlong, but they just like that person enough to not care. Basically, audiences think that they got their way with this group for the most part, hence, at least from what I've seen, there isn't actually much anger towards the trainees themselves. The anger is instead directed at Mnet for supposedly separating cute pairs, like Sanghyun and Liu and Unshin and Kangmin. Yeah, there's rage at Mnet for Kangmin's lack of debut, even though many of those people also seem to feel that the lineup was fan-chosen, implying that it was the fans, not Mnet, who rejected Kangmin? I don't know what's going on there. Basically, there's a lot of depression over the lack of Leo and Kangmin, and those two have some absolutely insane fans. But overall, there isn't much anger about Riggory, which is what's important for this minisode and for Mnet. Junmin was receiving the majority of said anger, but he didn't debut, averting a potential hate train there. Hence, in short, I predict that the Riggory won't affect the group much, if at all. Now, the thing the Riggory will affect is the future of Produce/Planet 999. Mnet got their way with this, and just as how getting their way with Kepler, then Zero Base 1, then Isna made them bolder, so will this. They've found out that the fans will accept the 0-star rank and the live selection vote Riggory. They've also had more and more heavily rigged trainees accepted. No one in their right mind would argue that Sungwon, Shinlong, and Gongwoo weren't pushed, but none of them got career-ruining hate because of that specifically. Even better for Mnet, like with the previous planet groups plus Isna, they've got people in subtly enough that audiences think it was organic, Jiahao being a prime example and Unshin and Leo less prime ones. And on top of that, they managed to manipulate their way into getting a Korean center this time. So now they know the perfect amount of Riggory the Chinese trainees need to debut but not win. I'm rambling, but basically yes, they will continue to use these tactics, and they'll become more refined over time. Actually, I think the incomplete stories in episode teasers showed this. Like I mentioned for Unshin's Riggory, Mnet included storylines in some teasers which were never actually followed through on. I think this is because they realised they could get the same reaction out of a teaser as a whole episode, especially for popular trainees. Hence, they had no need to waste 20 minutes when they could spend 10 seconds on something and then rig someone else in the actual episode. Insanely efficient and refined, I think. I just want to clarify, so like with Unshin's bad vocal edit that was supposed to be in episode 3 and 4, it's entirely possible that that got cut because Gomwoo was involved and they cut him because of his controversy, but that doesn't explain Yumeki's like arrogant arc in Lucky Macho being cut and stuff like that. There were other examples. So, like, Yumeki's one, for instance, I think is proof that Mnet were like, oh, we actually don't need to do it in the full episode anymore. We can, like, make maximum use of the teasers and then maximum use of the episodes separately, which I think is, like, kind of crazy. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Mnet felt confident enough to bring back the Planet Pass next season, or to even add producer picks to the final group. I guess only time will tell. The C show only being 4 episodes could be proof that Riggory will reign. And with that possibly depressing thought in mind, let's wrap up this minisode. As I reminded people many a time throughout the run of Boys to Planet, Mnet almost always get their way, and in the case of this show specifically, they basically got their way. Enough that their small failures don't matter, let's just say that. Honestly, I don't have much to say for this conclusion, which is probably good since I've reached 6,000 words of script, but it was rigged, guys. Is that what you want me to say? Because it's true. Aldi 1 were rigged, and in the end, Mnet were pretty damn happy about the results. So let's look forward to the C show, I guess. Debut Z, how now? I just unfortunately feel a tad betrayed that despite the Riggory, Dongyu didn't debut. But at least because of the Riggory, Shinlong debuted. There's a silver lining to everything, even Mnet's Riggory. I mean, Mnet pick very balanced lineups which will create good groups. They're not always the best lineups or the most talented lineups, but they're always good ones, and that knowledge has, I suppose, helped me achieve Mnet Riggory enlightenment. I'll shut up now. Yep, that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next minisode for something very close to my heart.